Hey gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu by Gaslight Investigator's Guide from Chaosium Inc. This is written by Kevin McDonald and Mike Mason, with William A. Barton, Kevin Ross, David Wade, Lynn Hardy, Russell A. Smith, Violet Penn, Rodney Bazier, BJ Kopacki, Kerry Hall, and Jason Bell. And I apologize if I've mispronounced any of those names. This 296-page hardcover with PDF is going to arrive in stores in December. It will carry an MSRP of $54.99. I do believe the original game plan was for a September release, but unfortunately it's kind of fallen back. So they are looking at December with this hitting stores. This was available in very limited quantities at Gen Con 2024, and that is where the fine folks over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy. Now, I will guess that PDF alone will probably run somewhere around $24.99, maybe up to $29.99 when it is finally available. I'll take a guess. It's probably going to come out in December as well. All right, having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got the Investigator's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight. Few things to mention before we get stuck in. Once again, the fine folks over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. And these days, it's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what you're going to find inside this guide. Also, there is nothing spoiler-wise as far as the mythos during the Victorian age, because this is all player-facing. This is an investigator's guide. There is a keeper's guide, which is slated to arrive sometime in 2025, which is, of course, going to be Game Master-facing, and it's going to have all those mythos goodies in there, which I am very excited to see. The way this is laid out, as far as my understanding, is that if you are only interested in Cthulhu by Gaslight, you'll be able to pick up this Investigator's Guide as well as the Keeper's Guide when that comes out, and you will be able to run Cthulhu by Gaslight. You will not need the two Call of Cthulhu core books in order to run Cthulhu by Gaslight. That is as far as I understand. All right, let's jump on in. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the credits page, because there are a lot of people who work very hard to bring this to fruition, including authors of previous editions, because this is the fourth edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight. We've got a lot of artists, proofreaders, editing, development, all of that. Let's take a quick moment here, give these folks their due, and then we will jump on in. Now, as far as production quality, top-notch, as we come to expect from Chaosium Inc. We've got nice paper stock, very well done. We've got a couple of bookmarks, just like so. We even have a poster map of London, which I'll show you when we get to the finale of the book, when we get to the end of the book. But all in all, really nicely done. Artwork throughout is fairly uniform and pretty nicely done. There's a few ho-hum pieces of art. I will mention, though, kind of surprised that we don't have as much mythos-related artwork as I would have expected. There is some. Don't get me wrong. It's not as if there isn't any. But a vast majority of the artwork is just sort of era artwork, which you'll see as we're flipping on through. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more mythos artwork. So we're going to get an introduction discussing Cthulhu by Gaslight overall. Next, we're going to get into Land of Hope and Glory, which is going to get into some details about England itself. So we will see discussions of social class, which plays a huge role in English society during this period of time. In fact, the whole UK, it plays a massive role. We get breakdowns of the elites. We get the upper class. We get the middle class. We get the working class, discussions of the poor, the working poor. We also see information about where people would live, what it was like to live maybe on a rural estate or to be living in the slums of Whitechapel. So all that information is included here. And I will point out, as an American keeper who feels that they've got a pretty decent grasp of the Victorian era, there were a lot of interesting things I learned by reading this book. So kudos for that, because there is a lot of great information throughout the Investigator's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight. So we're going to go from about 60 plus pages of background about England, and then we're going to jump into our character creation. So creating our investigators. So we'll get a breakdown of the various different careers, the different skills. Now, as I pointed out, it is my understanding that this is a player's handbook for Cthulhu by Gaslight. So all of the skills get breakdowns for the players to learn what those skills do. Now, of course, just like we see in the Keeper's book for Call of Cthulhu, I'm going to guess the Keeper's book for Cthulhu by Gaslight is going to get into far more detail about these skills. But as you can see here, Persuade, Psychic, Read Lips. Now, there are some changes in skills. So like Pilot is Pilot Balloon. So a gas or hot air balloon. The new skills for the Gaslight era get a bit more detail than what we see with just those skills. So here's an example like alienism, reassure, religion. We have some random tables if the players want to completely create a random background for their investigator. So we've got that. And then we get into our gear and weapons. And I will point out, I always have a hard time understanding English currency during this period and shillings and pennies and half farthings. Actually, I don't think there's half farthings anymore at this point. But still, kind of makes my head spin a little bit. But thankfully, there is a breakdown of that here. We have a lot of info about pistols and rifles, shotguns. Now, here's an interesting side note you may not know. During this period of time, there were no regulations on gun ownership throughout the UK. And the funny thing is, in rural areas, most people wouldn't carry a firearm because if they were on land that they didn't own, which is going to be a vast amount of the time, and they were caught with a gun, then they would be charged with poaching. Even if they didn't have any animals that they had shot, they'd be considered poachers. I thought that was really interesting. So now we're going to shift back into discussion about the Victorian era. So we had our investigator creation, we had our gear. Now we're going to get back into kind of diving a little deeper into various aspects of this period. So like exploration. So we're going to get into a bunch of info about various different expeditions, different groups who would fund expeditions. Interestingly enough, a lot of times excavations would start off as a military operation, and then they would shift gears. So a lot of times, the early excavations of sites were done by military officers, and then scientists and amateur archaeologists, things like that, would start to show up afterwards. I did not know that. I thought that was pretty cool. We're going to get into science, pseudoscience, and the occult. So we'll get into medicine during this period and other avenues of science. Then we're going to get into the pseudosciences and the occult. We get quite a bit of information regarding the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I'll be the first to mention, I never really ran much Gaslight as far as my 40 plus years running Call of Cthulhu. I didn't have anything against it. It's just my favorite period is the 20s and 30s, so I didn't kind of gravitate towards that. But I seem to recall the Golden Dawn having a huge role in Cthulhu by Gaslight's prior editions, and that they tended to be an adversary to the player characters and had a lot more mythos-related ties to them rather than just the occult. Next, we're going to dive on into Victorian London, different areas. We get some keyed maps as well, some important locations that player characters are probably going to utilize quite often, such as museums. So I like this section quite a bit. We start getting into some information about different clubs, different social aspects of the city of London. Then we start moving beyond London. So we'll get a little bit of information about Scotland and Ireland, Wales. We'll even discuss the United States a bit, which I love the fact that if you already have Down Darker Trails, you can tie this in. I don't know if there's going to be like a massive campaign that at some point arrives, which is going to tie Gaslight as well as Down Darker Trails together. But I think that would be really cool because they're both set during the same era. So I like that a lot. So we get into all this information about travel. Early automobiles start arriving on the scene, just like we have early phonographic recordings, although the reality is, I want to say they're mainly wax cylinders at this point. Start getting into the British Empire and how the sun never sets on it. So really nicely done. But once again, you're not going to find really any sort of mythos information. There's Buffalo Bill's Wild West show that toured Europe at this point in time. We get some breakdowns of important events for the British Empire as well. And then we'll move into a couple of appendices. The first is a look at the rules. And this is pretty bare bones, but it will at least give players an idea of how the rules for Call of Cthulhu and, of course, Cthulhu by Gaslight are going to operate. Now, the Keeper's Guide is going to get into far more detail with this, I guarantee. So we've got that, and then we're going to get into some resources. And I thought it was kind of interesting because there are some books I have read that were used as resources. One is What Jane Austen Ate and Charles Dickens Knew, which I picked up back in the 90s. I used that. So we get some new character sheets. We'll get our index. And then we also have our poster map of London. Very cool. Now, this is only single-sided. There's nothing on the other side, but this is also keyed. Very nice. So that is a peek inside Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu by Gaslight's Investigator's Guide. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts and give Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu by Gaslight's Investigator's Guide a review score. I really like this book a lot. Yes, I do have some minor critiques. One being, I'm kind of surprised that Chaosium Inc. didn't try a bit harder to release both the Investigator's Guide as well as the Keeper's book, if not together, at least relatively close to each other, because that does not seem to be the case that's going to take place here at all. Sort of along the lines of what happened with Pendragon's latest edition. That core book is excellent, and it's called a core rule book, but in reality, it is a player's book more so than a core rule book, because there's so much that's pointed out to refer to the Game Master's book for. That does happen in this as well. So sadly, we are going to have to wait a while until we get the Keeper's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight, which means you might not get as much use out of this as you would like. Now, I could see utilizing the Keeper book for Call of Cthulhu in a pinch in order to maybe play some previous edition adventures for Cthulhu by Gaslight. But once again, this is incomplete without the Keeper's Guide. Yet this is an excellent player's handbook, essentially, for Cthulhu by Gaslight. I'm also kind of surprised by the number of typos that are in this book. We don't normally see a lot of those in Chaosium Inc. releases, and there's not a ton, and there's none that really like jump out and you're like, whoa, what the hell were they thinking? But there are quite a few times that we see that there's too many spaces between words, and on occasion, the wrong word is inserted into a sentence. So it does make you stop for a second and go, wait a second. Oh, this is what they're trying to say. So like I said, kind of surprised with that. The artwork overall, pretty decent. Like I said, I would like to have seen more mythos-related artwork. There are some ho-hum pieces of art as well, where you're kind of reading the book and take a look and you're thinking, I don't know if that piece of artwork really brings anything to the table here. But all in all, the artwork is fine to good for the most part. Production quality, the rest of the book, excellent. Like I said before, it's got really nice paper stock. The book should hold up to a lot of repeated use at your game table. So all in all, some relatively minor critiques as far as the Investigator's Guide for Cthulhu by Gaslight. I do have to say, I enjoyed the hell out of reading this book, because even as an American keeper who thought he knew quite a bit about the Victorian era in England and the UK, there were loads of things that I learned. And that's actually one of the things I've always appreciated about Call of Cthulhu set during historical periods, is not only it's a fantastic game, but you learn a bunch of stuff too. Always appreciate that quite a lot. Now, if you've got any interest in pursuing the mythos during the reign of Queen Victoria, then I certainly recommend slap on your Wellingtons, grab your deerstalker cap, and head on out onto the moors, because the game's afoot. And the Investigator's Guide for Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu by Gaslight, is going to be a must-have addition to your collection. It is that good. I give the Investigator's Guide an 8.5 out of 10. I do recommend it highly. Like I said, some minor critiques, but all in all, I am super pumped to see what we get with that Keeper's Guide when it arrives in 2025. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news and pontificate about our hobby. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you're not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.